The stars had always been a place of wonder for humanity, but for galactic councils, humanity was a curiosity at best and an annoyance at worst, a species that occupied a small, rocky planet in a quiet system on the edge of the Orion Arm, unremarkable by their standards, technologically primitive and socially chaotic compared to the sophisticated civilizations that had mastered interstellar travel centuries before, yet they had watched us with thinly veiled disdain, dismissing our scientific achievements as flukes, our military as a minor nuisance, and our diplomats as inexperienced children playing at politics. And it was this arrogance that would become the seed of their downfall, for the humans of the 24th century had quietly grown in strength, developing technologies in secrecy, perfecting strategies that balance cunning, intuition, and brute force, and building fleets capable of responding to threats that no one believed we could understand. And the first contact that ignited the series of events that would shake the galaxy to its core occurred when a scout vessel from the Trithian Conclave entered our system, scanning with instruments meant to measure the energy output of our solar activity, our atmospheric composition, and the electromagnetic signatures of our civilizations. And yet their sensors could not detect the subtle defenses we had woven into our planetary networks, the camouflage technologies embedded in orbital satellites, nor the adaptive AI systems that monitored their every movement. And when the scout attempted to transmit their findings to the Conclave, our cybernetic countermeasures intercepted and rerouted the data, feeding them a false narrative of a weak, barely capable species, unaware of the storm brewing in the heart of Earth's defense programs. And in the council chambers of the Trithian elders, discussions were lively, the consensus unanimous, that humanity was not a threat, that we were a backward, fragmented species unlikely to survive beyond our solar system, and orders were dispatched to maintain observation, to catalog us, and to ensure that our development remained contained within the parameters they deemed safe, while at the same time, other member species of the Council debated opportunistically, some expressing mild concern over humanity's rapid technological growth in isolated sectors, yet all were ultimately overridden by the confident voices of those who had long studied the galaxy and its emergent species, confident that the humans will remain insignificant, incapable of strategic coherence in the face of organized, centuries-old civilizations, yet on Earth, while the councils debated our insignificance, humans were quietly achieving milestones that would have shocked the galaxy, creating propulsion systems that rivaled the fastest known alien ships, integrating energy shielding that could withstand weaponry previously considered superior to anything our species could wield, and training crews in a combination of tactical disciplines that combined centuries of military tradition with adaptive problem-solving that even our own leaders admitted surpassed expectation. And on that same day, as the Trithian Scout continued its routine surveys, the first real test of humanity's preparedness occurred, for an incident in the outer asteroid belt of our system triggered an automated response from one of our stealth defense arrays, designed to intercept unauthorized craft approaching the inner planets, and the Scout, perceiving the rapid deployment of drones and interceptor vehicles, attempted a retreat. But the array's AI had already anticipated such maneuvers, adapting in milliseconds to counter evasive trajectories. And within minutes, the Scout was immobilized, its engines disabled by a precision ion pulse that left it alive but helpless, and a message was transmitted directly to the vessel, not in the clumsy alien transmission protocols, but in clear, unmistakable human communication, stating that the ship had entered sovereign space without authorization, and although the crew of the Scout was composed of elite Trithian operatives, trained in diplomacy, espionage, and advanced science, they could do nothing but observe the display of coordination, foresight, and technological mastery before them. And when the first of our orbital frigates emerged from cloaked positions around the asteroid belt, sleek, angular, equipped with adaptive shielding, rapid-fire plasma turrets, and communication jammers designed to suppress their conventional sensors, the aliens realized too late that their underestimation of humanity had left them vulnerable to a species that had perfected the art of surprise, of strategy, and of overwhelming technological ingenuity. And as the captain of the Scout transmitted an urgent call for reinforcements back to the Conclave, the humans had already begun preparations to showcase what the galaxy had ignored for too long, coordinating military, scientific, and political branches to ensure that the moment of revelation would be absolute, decisive, and catastrophic to any who dare consider us weak. And over the next few hours, as our fleets assembled silently in orbit, the alien civilizations, thousands of light years away, will begin to notice anomalies in their interstellar communications. The sudden disappearance of minor outposts, unexplained disturbances in previously secure regions, and the subtle but unmistakable sign that humanity had mastered technologies that allowed near-instantaneous travel across vast distances, cloaking that made detection almost impossible, and weapons capable of neutralizing entire fleets without the prolonged engagement strategies the aliens had relied on for centuries. And on Earth, the Council of Human Leaders, composed of military strategists, scientists, and diplomats, convened in a secure orbital station to finalize the first operation, discussing not only tactics but the moral and psychological considerations of unleashing force on species that had underestimated us, recognizing that the galaxy would soon witness the consequences of arrogance, while our engineers and crews ran simulations, recalculated variables, and ensured that no misstep would betray the scale of our preparedness. And as a final countdown to humanity's first demonstration of strength approached, humans in orbit and on the planet's surface coordinated their actions with precision, transmitting encrypted signals to orbital platforms, activating defensive grids, and preparing the armadas that would soon make history. And when the Trithian Council received the first data indicating fleet movements in our system, panic rippled through their chambers as their analysts, unable to reconcile the scale, speed, and sophistication of human operations with their preconceived notions, scrambled to understand whether this was an anomaly, a misinterpretation, or an outright threat. And across the galaxy, other civilizations who had considered humans a minor inconvenience began to notice irregularities in sensor readings, intelligence, reports, and routine traffic, leading to heated debates, emergency council meetings, and rapid dispatches of reconnaissance units. Yet the humans remained hidden, their fleets invisible, their strategies unknowable, and their readiness absolute. And as night fell on the surface of Earth, the first phase of the operation was already underway. Small craft repositioning, defensive turrets aligning, orbital shields calibrating, and command networks finalizing engagement protocols. And in the silence before the storm, humans across the globe awaited orders, unaware of the shock that the galaxy would soon experience. For the first strike was not an act of aggression, but a demonstration, a controlled show of capability meant to shatter assumptions and send a message to every council, every species, and every observer who had underestimated our strength. And when the moment arrived, the Trithian scout, still immobilized in the asteroid belt, became the first witness to a display of human ingenuity. As drones coordinated attacks to neutralize its defenses, orbital cannons disabled its propulsion, and a fleet of human frigates, moving faster than expected, appeared almost instantaneously around the vessel. And as the captain of the scouts struggled to understand what was happening, communications from Earth transmitted with clarity, authority, and unyielding resolve, declaring that humanity was not weak, that we had observed, prepared, and waited for the moment when the galaxy would learn that underestimation was a fatal mistake. And the shockwave of this demonstration rippled outward, reaching distant council chambers, command hubs, and observation posts, forcing alien leaders to reconsider their assumptions, recalibrate their strategies, and confront the reality that the humans they had dismissed as insignificant were capable of orchestrating maneuvers that defied centuries of accumulated galactic military doctrine. And while the first engagement was technically small, the psychological impact was enormous, sending tremors to the confidence of even the most seasoned commanders. And on Earth, humans celebrated quietly, aware that this was only the beginning, a prelude to a campaign that would prove our strength not through reckless aggression, but through disciplined, overwhelming, and calculated demonstration. And as our fleets returned to stealth positions, and the Trithian scout reported back to the Council, the message was clear. Humans were no longer to be dismissed, no longer be underestimated. And the galaxy would soon learn that arrogance in the face of human capability came at the highest cost imaginable, setting the stage for a conflict that would reshape alliances, challenge assumptions, and reveal that the underestimated species, humanity, was capable of shattering armadas, defeating fleets, and rewriting the rules of engagement in the universe. As the shockwave of humanity's first demonstration radiated through the galaxy, news of the Trithian scout's fate ignited panic among neighboring civilizations. The Hierarch's dominion, the Velnari Syndicate, and the Erythian Collective all receiving fragments of censored data, showing a level of coordination and technological mastery they had never anticipated, and debates erupted within their councils, each member struggling to reconcile the unexpected sophistication of human tactics with their assumptions about a species they considered primitive. While on Earth, the Human Command Council analyzed every move, refining strategy for maximum impact, preparing contingencies in anticipation of retaliation, and coordinating with our intelligence networks to monitor potential threats across multiple sectors, understanding that the initial display was only the beginning of a larger campaign designed not merely to defeat, but to fundamentally alter perception of humanity in the interstellar arena. And as the first armadas of the Council mobilized in response, deploying warships, reconnaissance fleets, and strategic command vessels, they encountered a series of anomalies. Cloaked human frigates appearing suddenly at optimal firing positions, orbital minefields that recalibrated in real time to exploit weaknesses in alien navigation systems, adaptive energy shields capable of deflecting multiple weapon types simultaneously, and cybernetic attacks that infiltrated alien systems with precision and speed far beyond their expectations. And every encounter, from minor skirmishes to strategic blockades, revealed that humanity had anticipated not only the capabilities of these civilizations, but also their thought patterns, tactical biases, and over-reliance on hierarchical command structures, turning arrogance against them as perfectly as any weapon. And as human fleets advanced with measured precision, deploying decoy units, synchronized drone swarms, and rapid response strike teams, alien commanders began to witness the unraveling of their carefully constructed doctrines, with the Velnari fleet suffering losses that seemed inexplicable, their navigation arrays disrupted by electromagnetic pulses designed to mimic natural cosmic phenomena, and the Erythian Collective's automated defense grids falling silent under the influence of algorithms that anticipated every countermeasure they deployed, while across the battlefield, human crews executed maneuvers that combined centuries of naval tactics, modern combat theory, and adaptive learning, exploiting gaps in alien formations, targeting weak points with surgical accuracy, and forcing retreat after retreat. And on the political front, humans engaged in communications with moderate factions within the councils, offering negotiations framed in such a way that our strength was clear, our demands reasonable, and our capabilities undeniable, leaving alien diplomats in a state of confusion and awe, unable to reconcile the simplicity of our demands with the overwhelming sophistication of our demonstrations. And as weeks passed, the galaxy began to understand that humanity's strength lay not only in technology or fleet size, but in a fusion of strategy, adaptability, and resilience, in a capacity to anticipate, innovate, and execute plans with a level of cohesion unmatched by any other civilization. And when the first coordinated human assault on a council border system occurred, it was a revelation. The armadas that had once laughed at our presence now facing fleets that struck with the speed of thought, neutralizing forward positions, disabling planetary defenses, and forcing entire systems to surrender without a single human casualty. And as word of these victories spread, fear replaced arrogance in council chambers. Alien leaders beginning to comprehend that underestimating humanity had been a catastrophic error. And within our command centers, humans celebrated the effectiveness of strategies that had taken decades to perfect, while continuing to refine protocols, ensuring that every subsequent engagement would reinforce the lesson. Humanity was not only capable of defending itself, but of overwhelming any force that dared challenge our sovereignty. And as the first wave of alien fleets retreated in disarray, the psychological impact was immediate, with panic spreading through distant command nodes, analysts questioning the viability of conventional tactics, and political leaders scrambling to secure alliances and resources to confront a species whose strength and cunning were now undeniable. While on Earth, human scientists and engineers continued to advance our technologies, ensuring that every fleet movement, every deployment, and every engagement would be backed by systems capable of predicting and countering alien responses. And in the following months, the narrative across the galaxy shifted dramatically from dismissive humor and casual observation to urgent reassessment. As reports of human victories accumulated, the destruction of strategically significant fleets, the neutralization of command hubs, and the flawless execution of multi-system operations demonstrating a level of planning, coordination, and execution previously thought impossible. And throughout this period, Humans maintained discipline and precision, coordinating across planetary networks, orbital stations, and interstellar command nodes, ensuring that momentum was preserved, and that every action reinforced a central message to the galaxy. Those who had doubted humanity would pay a severe price for their arrogance, and as the alien forces attempted to regroup, adapt, and formulate countermeasures, they discovered that the humans' ability to learn, innovate, and coordinate surpassed anything in their historical records, creating a situation where traditional military doctrines, technological advantages, and strategic assumptions were rendered ineffective against a species that had anticipated them all, and with first full-scale engagement against a combined Trithian. An Erythian fleet occurred near the Epsilon Eridani sector. Humans unleashed a coordinated attack that neutralized warp engines, disabled energy shields, and incapacitated weapons arrays before alien commanders could respond effectively, with every movement executed according to pre-calculated variables and real-time adaptive algorithms, leaving alien forces bewildered, demoralized, and entirely unable to recover. And as reports from battlefield communications reached their respective councils, the panic intensified, with debates escalating into chaos, military leaders questioning the competence of their peers, and diplomats realizing that traditional negotiation had no leverage against a species that had already demonstrated the ability to dismantle entire fleets with precision, foresight, and speed. And across Earth, humans analyzed each encounter, studying alien responses, refining tactics, and preparing for subsequent operations, ensuring that every engagement reinforced our superiority while minimizing risk. And as months turned into years, humanity's campaigns across multiple sectors created a network of victories, alliances, and controlled territories, each success reinforcing the psychological and strategic dominance we held over alien civilizations. And as the galaxy slowly began to accept the reality of human strength, the narrative shifted from underestimation and ridicule to fear, respect, and cautious diplomacy, and every council, every fleet, and every species came to understand that humanity was not merely a contender in the galactic arena, but a dominant, calculating, and unstoppable force, capable of shattering armadas, rewriting strategies, and asserting control over situations previously assumed to be beyond our reach. And while humans maintained discipline, honor, and cohesion, the alien civilizations were left to confront the consequences of their arrogance, learning in a brutal, undeniable way that those who underestimated humanity did so at their own peril. And as the first full year of operations concluded, humans had not only demonstrated superior military capability, but had fundamentally altered the strategic landscape of the galaxy, forcing every civilization to reassess the meaning of strength, coordination, and intelligence, and leaving the unmistakable message: humanity was no longer to be underestimated, and the galaxy would never be the same again. As the wider galaxy reeled from the cascading failures of its once feared armadas, humanity shifted from reactive dominance to deliberate control, and this transition marked a moment when alien civilizations truly began to understand that they were no longer facing an emerging species, but a mature power that had planned every phase of expansion with ruthless patience. Because while the councils argued and blamed one another for disastrous miscalculations, human command quietly initiated the second strategic phase, one focused not on dramatic destruction, but on systematic dismantling of alien military logistics, communication chains, and economic lifelines. And across dozens of sectors, human task groups moved with near invisibility, striking fuel depots, disabling shipyards, seizing data archives, and collapsing supply routes with precision that left alien commanders unable to determine where the next blow would land. And it was during this phase that the true depth of human preparation became clear, for every captured outpost revealed evidence that humanity had studied alien cultures, command psychology, decision latency, and even political rivalries in exhaustive detail, exploiting long-standing tensions between council species by timing operations to coincide with internal disputes, council votes, and leadership transitions, ensuring confusion layered upon fear. And in one notable operation near the Calrix Trade Corridor, a heavily fortified junction protected by 3 allied species fell without a single human casualty when automated defenses were quietly reprogrammed to recognize human vessels as friendly, a flaw only possible because human cyber teams had already spent years mapping alien code structures thought unbreakable, And when alien reinforcements finally arrived, they found their own stations locked, weapons cold, and command systems unresponsive, forcing surrender without resistance. And such victories spread not as triumphant propaganda, but as whispered dread through military channels, because no one could explain how humans were always several steps ahead, always anticipating responses before they were formed. And within the councils, desperation replaced denial as emergency powers were invoked, militaries consolidated under joint commands, and ancient war doctrines were hastily revised. Yet every adjustment seemed to arrive too late, countered almost immediately by human adaptations that rendered new strategies obsolete within days. And as alien fleets attempted mass formations to overwhelm human numbers, humans responded by fragmenting the battlefield, using gravitational manipulation, localized sense of blackouts, and autonomous strike elements that operated independently yet cohesively, forcing enemies to fight dozens of isolated engagements instead of one decisive battle. And in each engagement, human crews demonstrated a calm professionalism that unnerved alien observers, responding to unexpected threats, not with panic or rigidity, but with creative solutions executed in seconds. And reports from captured alien officers revealed a growing belief that humans possess some form of predictive intelligence bordering on precognition, a rumor humanity neither confirmed nor denied, allowing fear to grow unchecked. And while alien morale eroded, human unity strengthened, for on Earth and across human-controlled systems, the population remained informed but composed, understanding that restraint and discipline were as vital as strength. And human leaders emphasized that this war was not about conquest for its own sake, but about ensuring that humanity would never again be dismissed, threatened, or controlled by distant councils who believed power was inherited rather than earned. And as diplomatic channels reopened under increasingly desperate alien overtures, humans dictated terms from a position of absolute leverage, demanding recognition of sovereignty, non-interference treaties, and access to former council-controlled trade networks, all while maintaining fleet readiness in case negotiations collapsed. And when some council factions attempted covert retaliation by sponsoring proxy raids against human-aligned systems, the response was swift and devastating, with human intelligence exposing the plots publicly, dismantling the proxy forces in hours, and isolating the sponsoring species diplomatically and economically, sending a clear message that deception would be met with consequences far worse than open conflict. And as these events unfolded, alien populations began to question their leadership openly, wondering how a species once mocked as chaotic and primitive had managed to outthink, outmaneuver, and outfight civilizations that claimed millennia of superiority. And the answer, slowly and painfully realized, was that humanity's strength had never been obvious because it was not centralized, ceremonial, or static, but adaptive, distributed, and forged through constant internal struggle, a quality alien societies had long abandoned in favor of rigid stability. And by the end of the third operational cycle, entire regions of space had fallen under human influence not through occupation, but through voluntary realignment, as smaller civilizations sought protection, trade, and alliance with the one power that had proven capable of standing against the councils. And within human command, this shift was recognized as the most dangerous phase yet, because dominance brought responsibility, and the risk of repeating the same arrogance the councils had shown. And so human leaders imposed strict operational limits, accountability measures, and civilian oversight even during wartime, a decision that baffled alien observers but further solidified human cohesion and legitimacy. And as the remaining council hardliners prepared what they believed would be a final, decisive counteroffensive, pooling their remaining armadas into a single overwhelming force, humanity watched calmly, already aware of fleet movements, supply shortages, command fractures, and internal dissent, having anticipated this exact reaction years before the first shot was fired. And as human fleets repositioned silently along the predicted vectors of advance, the galaxy stood on the edge of a confrontation that would determine not just who controlled territory, but whose understanding of power, adaptability, and survival would define the future of interstellar civilization. And for the alien civilizations who had once doubted humanity's strength, the realization settled heavily that they were about to witness the full consequences of that doubt. As the combined alien armada finally began its long-anticipated advance, moving as a single massive force drawn from the last reserves of council military power, humanity observed without urgency, because every ship, Every formation and every logistical compromise had already been mapped in human predictive models, and while alien commanders believed unity would compensate for earlier defeats, they failed to understand that unity without adaptability only created a larger, slower target. And as the Armada crossed into contested space, human fleets did not meet them head-on, but instead allowed the force to penetrate deeper along carefully chosen corridors seeded with dormant surveillance nodes, energy distortion fields, and navigation traps that subtly altered alien formation spacing, sensor calibration, and command synchronization without triggering alarms. And by the time alien leaders realized something was wrong, their armada was no longer operating as a single, cohesive entity, but as dozens of semi-isolated formations struggling to maintain alignment. And it was then that humanity initiated the engagement, not with overwhelming firepower, but with silence, as entire segments of the alien fleet suddenly lost communication with Central Command, their long-range sensors blinded by localized interference that appeared indistinguishable from natural stellar phenomena. And into this confusion moved human strike groups, small, fast, and precise, targeting command ships, logistics carriers, and power distribution nodes with weapons calibrated to disable rather than destroy, stripping alien vessels of mobility and coordination, while leaving them intact enough to spread fear through intact crews. And alien captains, trained for decisive fleet actions, found themselves unable to respond to threats they could not detect, attacked by enemies who appeared only briefly before vanishing again. And as frustration turned to panic, some commanders ordered blind volleys into empty space, wasting energy and revealing their positions, while others attempted to regroup only to discover that their navigation data had been subtly altered, causing collisions, formation drift, and cascading system failures. And across the battlefield, human commanders maintained constant situational awareness through decentralized command structures that allowed individual captains to adapt instantly without waiting for orders, a stark contrast to alien hierarchies that froze when central authority was disrupted. And as hours passed, the scale of alien losses became impossible to hide. Entire wings rendered combat ineffective without a single decisive clash, their crews exhausted, demoralized, and increasingly aware that they were being dismantled piece by an enemy who never overcommit, never revealed full strength, and never lost control of the tempo. And when the alien armada finally attempted a full retreat, believing escape preferable to annihilation, they discovered that the routes they had entered through were now closed, sealed by gravitational distortions and minefields that adjusted dynamically to their movements, forcing them into predictable vectors where human fleets waited. And it was here that humanity revealed the next layer of its capability, coordinated multi-vector strikes that combined kinetic precision, directed energy, and cyber disruption into a single synchronized assault, collapsing shields, disabling engines, and neutralizing weapons across hundreds of ships in minutes. And the sight of so many once feared warships drifting powerless through space shattered the remaining confidence of alien forces, leading to mass surrenders, abandoned vessels, and internal mutinies, as crews refused to continue a fight they no longer believed could be won. And as surrender signals flooded human channels, human commanders accepted them methodically, enforcing strict ceasefire protocols and securing ships without unnecessary loss of life, a restraint that further unsettled alien observers who had expected retribution rather than control. And when the last organized resistance ceased, the battlefield was transformed from a site of impending apocalypse into a silent graveyard of immobilized armadas. And across the galaxy, the impact was immediate and profound. Council communications fell into chaos. Political leaders struggled to explain the disaster to their populations, and the myth of inherent alien superiority collapsed under the weight of undeniable evidence. While on Earth, the response was measured, not celebratory but resolute, as human leaders addressed their people and allied systems with a clear message that this victory was not an end but a responsibility. And in the aftermath, humanity extended terms that reshaped galactic order, dissolving the old council structure, mandating equal representation, and enforcing strict limits on unilateral military actions, all backed by the unspoken understanding that human enforcement capabilities were no longer theoretical. And as alien civilizations began the slow process of rebuilding under new realities, many realized that humanity's greatest strength had not been the destruction of armadas, but the discipline to stop when victory was assured, to rebuild rather than dominate, and to ensure that the lesson of underestimation would never be forgotten. And in the quiet that followed the greatest fleet engagement in recorded History. The galaxy began to understand that power was no longer defined by age, size, or tradition, but by adaptability, unity, and the will to act decisively when tested, qualities humanity had forged long before anyone else thought them worth fearing. In the wake of the shattered armadas, the galaxy entered a period of uneasy stillness, a silence filled not with peace, but with recalculation, as civilizations large and small tried to understand what the collapse of the old military order truly meant, and humanity, fully aware that power in use would be as dangerous as power abused, shifted its focus from battlefield dominance to structural control, moving carefully to stabilize regions thrown into chaos by the sudden removal of council authority. And across former council space, human envoys arrived alongside security detachments and technical teams, not as conquerors but as enforcers of new balance, restoring trade routes, reopening communication networks, and preventing opportunistic warlords or rogue fleets from exploiting the vacuum left behind. And this phase proved more complex than combat, because where alien fleets could be disabled with precision, fractured societies required patience, negotiation, and an understanding of cultural fear and human diplomats, many of whom had trained for decades anticipating this moment, demonstrated an ability to balance firmness with restraint, making it clear that humanity would not tolerate aggression while offering stability to those willing to cooperate. And in many systems, the population welcomed the change, having lived for generations under distant councils that extracted resources and dictated policy without accountability. And as human-led interim, councils were formed, composed of local leaders under human oversight. A slow but steady normalization began, and yet not all accepted this new reality, because within the remnants of the old councils, a hard core of leaders refused to concede, retreating into remote systems and secret installations, convinced that humanity's restraint was weakness. And it was here that the final test of human resolve began to emerge, as intelligence reports surfaced of clandestine weapons projects forbidden, technologies, and attempts to resurrect armadas through covert alliances, and human command responded without hesitation, deploying specialized task forces designed not for open war, but for surgical neutralization, infiltrating hidden facilities, intercepting illicit supply chains, and dismantling threats before they could fully materialize, often without the wider galaxy ever knowing how close it come to renewed catastrophe. And as these operations unfolded, the myth of human omniscience deepened, with alien populations whispering that resistance was futile not because humans were cruel, but because they were always watching, always prepared, and always several steps ahead. And within humanity itself, debates intensified as leaders grappled with the long-term implications of their position, questioning how to prevent stagnation, arrogance, or the very kind of complacency that had doomed the councils. And strict doctrines were implemented to rotate leadership, decentralize power, and ensure civilian oversight of military operations, measures that astonished alien observers accustomed to rigid, unchanging hierarchies. And as years passed, human influence became normalized rather than feared, with joint research initiatives, shared defense networks, and integrated trade systems slowly weaving the galaxy into a more resilient whole. And yet beneath the stability, humanity never relaxed its vigilance, maintaining readiness, updating strategies, and continuously testing its own assumptions, understanding that strength was not a static achievement, but a process that demanded constant renewal. And when a final coalition of council loyalists launched what they believed would be a symbolic strike against a peripheral human-aligned system, hoping to inspire rebellion, the response was immediate and overwhelming, with human fleets intercepting the attackers before their intent could even be broadcast, neutralizing them so completely that the event barely registered beyond classified briefings. And this quiet ending to the last organized resistance marked the true conclusion of the conflict, not with galaxy-shaking battle, but with the realization that no meaningful force remained willing or able to challenge humanity's order. And as the galaxy slowly adjusted to a future shaped by human standards of accountability, adaptability, and strength, one truth became undeniable, that those who had doubted humanity's strength had not merely underestimated military power, but had failed to recognize a species defined by its ability to learn from struggle, to unify under pressure, and to wield power with intention rather than impulse, a lesson written not just in shattered armadas, but in the quiet stability that followed their fall. As stability took hold across former council space, humanity began to confront a challenge no simulation had fully captured: The psychological shift from survival-driven unity to stewardship-driven restraint, because while the galaxy now operated under systems designed or supervised by humans, the risk of complacency loomed as large as any external enemy, and human leadership responded by institutionalizing doubt as a strength rather than a weakness, embedding continuous red team analysis, civilian oversight councils, and independent ethical review bodies into every level of strategic command, ensuring that no assumption went unchallenged and no authority remained unchecked, a structure that alien observers found unsettling because it deliberately embraced internal friction as a safeguard against stagnation, and as joint human-alien academies were established to train future officers, diplomats, and engineers. The contrast between methodologies became clear, with alien students, accustomed to rigid doctrine, struggling to adapt to human instruction that rewarded initiative, dissent, and rapid adaptation under uncertainty. Yet those who succeeded emerged more capable than their predecessors, quietly reshaping their societies and process. And throughout this transformation, humanity maintained a constant strategic posture, not through intimidation but through readiness, rotating fleets through joint patrols, conducting transparent exercises, and openly publishing doctrine updates to remove ambiguity about red lines and consequences, a transparency that reduced misunderstandings while reinforcing deterrence. And despite these efforts, isolated incidents continue to test the system. Piracy resurged in fringe sectors. Rogue actors attempted to exploit transitional governance gaps, and extremist factions emerged preaching a return to the old council order. But each threat was addressed proportionally, decisively, and with minimal spectacle, reinforcing the understanding that order was maintained not by fear of destruction, but by certainty of response. And within human society, the experience of galactic war reshaped culture in subtle ways, fostering a renewed respect for preparation, collaboration, and long-term thinking, as citizens understood that peace was not a permanent state, but a condition sustained through effort and vigilance. And this awareness filtered into education, industry, and governance, ensuring that the lessons of underestimation and overconfidence were preserved across generations. And as decades passed, the memory of the shattered armadas faded into history rather than legend, studied not as a triumph of violence, but as a case study in strategic failure born of arrogance, and alien historians, granted full access to human archives, documented with growing unease how consistently their own civilizations had ignored warning signs, dismissed anomalous data, and silenced dissenting analysts, a pattern that humanity itself actively worked to avoid repeating. And when exploratory probes from beyond the known galactic rim were detected, emitting signatures unlike any previously cataloged species, humanity did not react with aggression or dismissal, but with curiosity, caution, and preparation, coordinated with allied civilizations to study the phenomenon collectively, demonstrating that strength did not require dominance, only readiness. And as the galaxy watched humanity take the lead without, claiming ownership, a quiet realization spread that the humans who had once shattered armadas were now defining a new model of power, one that balanced force with foresight, restraint with resolve, and authority with accountability. And for those civilizations that had once laughed at the idea of human strength, the final lesson settled deeply, that true power was not proven once in war, but sustained over time through discipline, adaptability, and a willingness to question oneself before the universe was forced to do it for you. As humanity settled into its role as the quiet, stabilizing force of the galaxy, a final truth began to surface among both humans and aliens alike, that the era of shattered armadas had not ended conflict, but had transformed its nature, and this realization came sharply when long-range observation arrays detected coordinated movements beyond the mapped boundaries of known space, signals not aggressive but probing, deliberate and patient, suggesting the presence of civilizations that had watched the fall of the councils from afar, and were now reassessing the balance of power. And unlike the councils before them, these distant observers did not rush forward with threats or demands, instead testing human-led systems through indirect pressure, subtle disruptions in trade flows, unexplained interference in deep space relays, and the quiet manipulation of proxy actors. And humanity recognized these signs immediately because they mirrored the very tactics humans themselves had once used against the councils. And rather than respond with force, human command initiated a measured counter-strategy, reinforcing resilience instead of retaliation, diversifying supply chains, hardening communication infrastructure, and exposing manipulation attempts through transparent, shared intelligence briefings that denied adversaries the secrecy they relied upon, and as these unseen challengers adjusted their approach, probing for weakness, they encountered a network civilization that could absorb stress without fracturing, adapt without panic, and respond without overreaction, and this frustrated attempts to provoke instability, revealing that humanity's greatest evolution since the war was not technological but structural, having built systems that assumed pressure as a constant rather than an exception. And within this environment, alien allies found themselves growing stronger not under domination, but through participation, contributing perspectives, technologies, and strategies that further reinforce the collective. And as trust deepened, joint exploration initiatives pushed farther into uncharted regions, encountering new phenomena, dormant megastructures, and remnants of civilizations long extinct, each discovery reinforcing the understanding that the galaxy was vast, dangerous, and indifferent to arrogance, and humanity ensured these lessons were shared openly, embedding humility into doctrine as firmly as strength. And when the first direct contact request finally arrived from the distant observers, transmitted through a carefully neutral channel, it was met not with fear or triumph, but with calm preparation, human diplomats supported by multi-species advisory teams responding with clarity, firmness, and unmistakable confidence rooted in proven capability. And the message was simple, that humanity sought cooperation, respected caution, and would not tolerate coercion, a statement backed not by threats but by the shared memory of what happened to those who underestimated us. And as negotiations began, the galaxy held its breath, not because it feared immediate war, but because it understood that the decisions made now would define the next age of interstellar civilization, and among alien populations, the narrative had fully shifted, no longer asking how humans had shattered armadas, but how they had avoided becoming what they destroyed. And the answer, slowly emerging, lay in humanity's refusal to see strength as entitlement, choosing instead to see it as obligation, a burden carried with vigilance, debate, and restraint. And as the first agreements with the distant civilizations took shape, framed by mutual verification and shared safeguards, the final remnants of the old council mindset faded, replaced by a galaxy that no longer revolved around inherited power but around earned trust. And in this new equilibrium, the legacy of the war was no longer fear, but clarity, a universal understanding that those who doubted humanity's strength had forced it to be revealed, and that once revealed, it had been shaped not into tyranny, but into a foundation upon which a more resilient, adaptive, and honest galactic order could stand. In the years that followed the first accords with the distant civilizations, the galaxy settled into a state that many had once believed impossible, a balance maintained not by fear of annihilation, but by a shared understanding of consequence. And at the center of this balance stood humanity, no longer an underdog nor a conqueror, but a reference point against which all emerging powers measure themselves. And this position carried weight that human leaders never allowed themselves to forget, because history had proven how quickly confidence could harden into arrogance, and so humanity institutionalized remembrance, preserving detailed records of the era when they were dismissed, ignored, and underestimated, not as propaganda but as cautionary study, ensuring future generations understood that strength had been earned through preparation, sacrifice, and restraint rather than destiny. And across the galaxy, alien societies underwent their own transformations, reforming governance, structures, decentralizing command, and encouraging internal debate where once obedience had been absolute. Changes driven not by human mandate, but by the undeniable evidence that rigidity had nearly destroyed them, and as trade flourished and joint exploration expanded beyond previously contested regions, cooperation replaced suspicion in places once defined by rivalry. And when crises arose, whether natural stellar disasters or political instability, responses were coordinated, transparent, and swift, preventing escalation before it could spiral into conflict. And within this environment, humanity's military presence gradually shifted from visible deterrence to embedded readiness. Fleets positioned not as symbols of dominance, but as guarantees of response, a quiet reassurance that order would be upheld if challenged. And among alien populations, the phrase that once carried mockery, human strength, became synonymous with reliability, preparation, and fairness, a transformation that few had predicted and fewer still had believed possible. And when historians across multiple species documented the turning point of the age, they did not mark it at the moment the armadas were shattered, But at the moment humanity chose what to do afterward, choosing restraint over revenge, structure over chaos, and responsibility over triumph, and this choice echoed far beyond human-controlled space, influencing how new civilizations approached first contact, how power was negotiated, and how mistakes were corrected before they became catastrophes. And as humanity looked outward once more, toward mysteries still unanswered and challenges yet unseen, there was no illusion of permanent peace. Only a quiet confidence grounded in hard-earned experience, an understanding that the galaxy would always test those who stood within it, and that survival, dignity, and progress depended not on never being challenged, but on being ready when challenges came. And so the final lesson of the era settled into collective memory across countless worlds, not as a warning carved into wreckage, but as a principle carried forward, that those who doubted humanity's strength had forced it into the open, that those who challenged it had learned its cost, and that those who chose to understand it discovered something far more enduring than fear, a species capable of overwhelming force, disciplined restraint, and a resolve to shape power into something that can endure. And in this understanding, the galaxy moved forward, forever changed by the moment it realized, too late, that humanity had never been weak, only waiting.